This is the Nebraska Greats, a weekly podcast as a service to the Nebraska Greats Foundation, which serves former collegiate athletes facing medical needs and financial challenges. Your tax-deductible contribution will change the life of a former college sports hero. Please give online at negreats.org. And now, here's your host, Jim Rose.
Thank Matt Tompkins, and welcome again, everyone, to the Nebraska Greats podcast. This is a podcast with the Nebraska Greats Foundation, which serves former collegiate athletes from many of the 16 schools in Nebraska who have medical issues, face financial challenges. It's a thrill to have all of you with us, and our latest installment is really sort of a family affair. We go to the head of the family, a Nebraska football family for sure. The name Burrow will be very, very familiar to Nebraska fans over the last generation or two, starting with our guest today, former Husker All-Conference safety Jimmy Burrow, who played on the 1975 Big 8 Conference co-champion and also was the hero of the 1974 Sugar Bowl victory over the Florida Gators, winning a game against an SEC opponent. Now, that's something, Jimmy Burrow, that Nebraska fans would love to revisit. It's great having you here.
Well, thanks for having me on. And, it's been a long time ago, but it's always fun to relive those memories and talk about big wins like that Sugar Bowl. So it was quite a night. Me being described as a hero, there were a lot of guys that were involved in that, even more so than me. But I did have a part in it, and I think it was a big win for Coach Osborne and really Nebraska football in general at the time.
Well, we'll visit about the Sugar Bowl in a second, but the name Burrow is multi-generational. It started with Jimmy on some of Coach Osborne's early teams, and then, of course, Jamie and Dan Burrow, and the whole country knows about Joe Burrow. But to have Jamie and Dan play at Nebraska had to be a real thrill for the family.
Well, it was, and growing up, those two definitely wanted to be a part of Nebraska football, and that we were fortunate that both of them experienced that. Jamie was in Coach Osborne's last recruiting class, and Dan came a few years later. So both ended up playing for Coach Solich for the most parts of their career, and it just continued the Nebraska tradition for our family, and really opened up another avenue as we got to know Coach Solich. And then I ended up 14 years with Frank Solich at Ohio. So that whole thing with those guys going to Nebraska was a big deal to our family.
Let's start with how you got here. Now, many don't remember this. They may be able to tell by your accent, but you come from a little town, Emory, Mississippi, which is actually not far from Starkville, which is not close to any place. How in the heck did you get from Emory, Mississippi to Lincoln, Nebraska?
Well, yes, I was born in Virginia, but really grew up in Amory. And as I entered really fifth grade, we moved to Amory, although I'd been going to school there for several years commuting from a even smaller town than Amory. And we moved right next door to a guy that was named Jim Walden. And Jim Walden was the head high school football coach at Amory. My dad had been the principal and eventually the assistant superintendent, and played a big part in hiring Coach Walden, who played for Bob Devaney at Wyoming and then played in the CFL. So when he was done, he was hired as the football coach. So fifth grade, we moved next door. I started playing for him in the 10th grade, and as a defensive back, and eventually once he left, I was the quarterback. But Coach Devaney had given him a call and wanted him to join his staff at Nebraska, and so he did. Of course, he loved Coach Devaney and his success in college and getting a coaching job. Had a lot to do with Coach Devaney's influence, and so then 2 years later, I had been recruited by Nebraska, Mississippi State, Ole Miss. Didn't know much about Nebraska, so it was basically State and Ole Miss was the two that I was most interested in. Broke my arm in the game against Starkville for the conference championship. so both schools, really everybody kind of backed off because I wasn't for sure one of those. I don't even know if they had them back then, but I wasn't a five-star recruit. But both of them continued to ask me to walk on. I went to Ole Miss as a walk-on. Started every game as a freshman, and thought I had earned the right to be put on scholarship. And during that whole time, Coach Walden had kept up with me and heard that maybe Ole Miss wasn't going to put me on scholarship, and so he went to Coach Devaney, and they had a spot open, and he said, "Hey, if it doesn't work out at Ole Miss, you can always come here." So went in again to Ole Miss, Billy Kennard, and said, "Hey, I've got an offer to go play for Nebraska." I think he thought that I was kind of trying to pull a fast one on him because Nebraska had just won 2 national championships, and he said, "Hey, we're just not ready to put you on scholarship till we see what you can do in the fall." And I said, "Okay, I'm transferring to Nebraska." Walked out of the office, called Coach Walden and Coach Devaney, and that's where it all started.
Now, at the time, Ole Miss was really actually kind of a power in the SEC. John Vaught was their coach. You weren't recruited by Coach Vaught, or was he in the program at the very beginning of your recruitment there? You talked about Coach Kennard, but
yeah.
I can't imagine John Vaught would let a star from Mississippi get away.
Well, I'd always wanted to go to Mississippi State. My dad played basketball there. So I was I had my cowbell. I was a diehard Mississippi State fan, but even enrolled in the summer school at Mississippi State. But Ole Miss kept calling. They said I could play baseball. So that kind of turned the tide. And I'm not sure when Coach Vaught retired, but Billy Kennard, which, that's another legendary name and family in Ole Miss football. That's who recruited me, and Archie Manning had just graduated. Definitely was recruited as a defensive player, not a quarterback, and wanted to stay at Ole Miss. 70 miles from Amory. We had freshman teams back then, and so you grow even more so with your freshman class because you practice just with the freshmen, and you played a 6-game SEC schedule, and so I really had no desire to go that far from home to play for Nebraska, even though I knew it was the powerhouse of the time. But Ole Miss certainly had it was in their heyday too, right after Archie Manning's year. So it was quite a few weeks there trying to decide what to do. And I always say, I guess in my family, I was the one of the first transfers that eventually followed to Joe and his transfer from Ohio State.
That was part of the family DNA, Transfer is not necessarily that unusual to the Burrow family.
My mom had won a state championship as a basketball player at a place called Fulton, and transferred the next year to Smithville, where she became even more of a basketball legend. So I guess she really started the whole transfer deal.
So we can blame Grandma. All right. We blame Grandma on this. Actually, Jimmy, you were a very, very good basketball player too. In fact, I think you said on occasion that basketball was really your first sport. Did you get a lot of attention as a basketball player?
Well, again, I was not the biggest guy at the time. So, I was a little undersized for really football, maybe, and basketball. My dad was a basketball coach. I'd sat on the bench as kind of a manager mascot growing up. And so basketball was really, really what I loved. And it's kind of ironic that I had already pretty much committed to playing college football, but I didn't get picked for the high school all-star game in football, but I did in basketball, which is at the Coliseum in Jackson. So the afternoon I played in the basketball all-star game and went as a spectator to the football game that night. So again, a lot of irony in that, but I still had hopes that, hey, somebody might see me that day and let me keep playing basketball. But I pretty much knew the direction to go was football, and made the right decision.
Well, it's probably a good thing that Coach Walden, Coach Devaney, Coach Osborne didn't know that you were not picked for the All-Star game, because they're thinking, wait a minute, did we miss on this guy? If he's a basketball player, how's he playing in an All-Star game? And we're recruiting him as a football player, and he didn't get picked for the football All-Star game.
Well, that probably, but Coach Walden had followed me enough. I think he had confidence that also another kind of thing in this whole deal was they needed a scout team quarterback. And back then, you did have pretty much unlimited scholarships. And Coach Walden had told Coach Devaney, I believe, that, hey, I know that he can serve his purpose that first year as a scout team quarterback. So my first year, literally, I practiced with the defensive backs, but as soon as a scout team quarterback was needed, I went and did that against Willie Harper and John Dutton and Rich Glover and that whole group as the scout team quarterback. And that was the year Johnny Rodgers won the Heisman and we beat Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl. But I spent really that whole year for the most part playing quarterback.
So that was really good for you to play defensive back, because then you didn't have to go up against All-Americans and future first-round draft choices as the scout team quarterback, because you didn't exactly have all-conference linemen in front of you as the scout team quarterback. So those guys really enjoyed taking on the scout team in practice.
Yeah, I can't say that I wasn't nervous and scared, especially the first couple of weeks when I'd read all about these guys, and now under center. And back then, a lot of the teams were running the wishbone or option offenses, and so I was carrying the ball a lot against those guys. So it was a great opportunity for me. But I was glad when the Orange Bowl was over and I was fully invested as a defensive back.
This explains why Jamie and Dan played defense and Joe didn't run the option. Now we know the secrets about the Burrow family.
That's probably right. Actually, Dan was a pretty good option quarterback for me at Ames High over in Iowa. And but we all love defense, and even Joe during the state championship game here in Ohio and some of the postseason playoff games, he did play some defensive back, and he loved defense. It's just as he became more and more the quarterback, they wouldn't let him play, but he liked it. He was physical, and he got that on us from the rest of our family.
Visiting with Jimmy Burrow, the father of Joe Burrow, Dan Burrow, Jamie Burrow, the first family of Nebraska football over the last 25 or 30 or 40 years. And this is a terrific opportunity to look back on not only those early years of Coach Osborne, but then all the way through what was a sensational college career for your third son, Joe Burrow, and not to the Heisman Trophy. So you get to Nebraska, and Devaney retires, and Tom Osborne is your coach. Now he's on the offensive side. Really not much changed for you on the defensive side, because Coach Kiffin and Coach Powers stayed. So much of that was the same. But talk about the difference between Devaney and Osborne as head coaches.
Well, Coach Osborne had pretty much called the offense for several years in the championship years, and so that was a pretty seamless transition for him to be the head coach, because he was still basically offensive coordinator and called all the plays defensively, like you said. I think Coach Walden left after my first year, and so there was a few changes here and there, but Kiffin and Powers were really the two that were there the whole time. And their personalities, Coach Devaney, Coach Osborne, they were just so different personality wise. They were both very driven and cared a lot about their players and that sort of thing. But for example, in the Orange Bowl, we after the game we had a big players party that Coach Devaney had organized in the hotel. So I think that was to keep us all from going out. And then just remembering, Coach Osborne in the bowl games, that wouldn't be anything that he would do. He was always concerned about us, going out and making sure we did the right thing, as Coach Devaney was. But I think, just that personality of, hey, I know you guys are going out, so I'm going to keep you in this hotel in a big ballroom, whereas opposed to, I think Coach Osborne just hoped we didn't go out and really tried to talk to us about doing the right thing.
Well, it had to be hard for Coach Osborne. Here's Devaney, extraordinarily popular with the fans, extraordinarily popular with the media, totally different personality. And a former defensive back from your era once told me the story of how Coach Osborne wanted to make sure everybody knew that he was in charge. So you can confirm or deny this particular anecdote, Jimmy, in a practice in Coach Osborne's first or second years when he decided to show the receivers how to run a route. And it was during a live drill. And he said, now, fellas, here's how you run this route. So he ran this route. The quarterback at the time, Dave Humm, threw the ball high. Tom went for it. And one of the defensive backs, which you were in that core of defensive backs, laid Coach Osborne out. And afterward, Power says Devaney would have caught it. Is that true? Did that really happen?
I don't know all those details, but I do remember Coach Osborne lining up. I think it was against Randy Borg, maybe in a one-on-one situation. I can't remember the results totally, but I'm sure if there was a ball thrown anywhere that Coach Osborne was going to lay out and do everything he could to get it. And knowing Randy and how we were taught in the secondary by Powers, he wasn't going to let that opportunity to go either. So it probably did happen that way.
Coach Powers probably said go live. He said go live.
Well, that's part of the great thing about both Coach Devaney and Coach Osborne. They were so competitive, and that rubbed off on all of our players and our team during Coach Devaney's years, certainly, and Coach Osborne even got passed on down to Coach Solich, who's as competitive as anybody.
Those first few years of Coach Osborne, when you don't have Johnny Rodgers and you don't have Jeff Kinney and some of the guys that were so critical during the national championship years, defensively, Nebraska was actually quite good. One of the nationally ranked defenses in your first 2 or 3 years. You were on that team. A lot of guys feel like, if we just had a little bit more offensive success, we might have been able to win a championship or two, maybe get into another national title game. Defensively, there weren't a whole lot of steps taken back during Coach Osborne's first couple of years.
We had great players, a lot of guys that played in the NFL. I mean, Bob Nelson and Tom Root at linebacker, and Bob Martin and Ray Phillips and Wander Mons and Dave Butterfield and in the secondary and up front we had just a lot of guys that played in the NFL. So the players were there, and we had great coaches, and Monty Kiffin, who eventually became one of the best defensive coordinator in the history of the NFL, won a Super Bowl, and then Coach Powers, who was a very successful coach at Washington State and Missouri. But, we never looked at it like that. I mean, we believed in Coach Osborne. We believed in our offense. And there were times that you always hope to score more points, but then there's always a few games where, hey, maybe defensively, if we'd have played a little better, we wouldn't have lost that particular game too. But we had a lot of good players and good coaches.
Visiting with Jimmy Burrow, former Nebraska defensive back. Now let's talk about that Sugar Bowl game against Florida. Good team in '74. Got beat by Missouri. They had some NFL guys. Got beat by Wisconsin on a play that you would typically not find. There was some broken coverage. And guy got free for a deep pass late in the game. And then, of course, Oklahoma, which won the national championship, even though they were on probation. Pretty good team. But in that Sugar Bowl game, defense really saved the day. It's 1st and goal at the 1-yard line for Florida late in the third quarter, and they're already ahead 10-0. They punch it in there, it's going to be hard. And you stop them. You individually stopped 4th and 1 play to get the ball back to the offense. They subsequently went down to score, held, got the ball back, kicked a couple of field goals, and won the game. But talk about that play. It was a pitch play. It was an option play. But talk about that play and how it was drawn up by Kiffin and Powers to get you in position to make that game-saving play.
They were Florida, which is unheard of to think about this, but they were actually running the wishbone back then. Had really, as you said, a lot of great athletes on both sides of the ball. And I think it was a goal line stand. I think Wander and Bob Nelson and Tom Root maybe had made a stop or two the early downs, and then it was 4th and 1. We were down 10-0. They decided to go for it, and I was a corner at the time. Eventually played safety the next year, but we were covering the corners. If there was a wide out, the corner that side, man-to-man coverage, and on the goal line, you just kind of knew they weren't going to throw. So Coach Kiffin and Coach Powers had come up with a defense in the critical situation that even though you were covering the wide out man-to-man, you were peeking in the backfield, and if they ran the option, you just basically executed a corner blitz for the pitch, and nobody else really was responsible. Everybody made sure they had the quarterback, and so I blitzed, and they pitched it, and I made the tackle. I think it was yard line, and some people may thought he slipped a little at the time, but I was there, made him cut back, and was able to make a low tackle on him. And Coach Osborne made a change there at quarterback and put in Terry Luck, who was one of my best friends, and we had been roommates for a couple of years, being both from down south. And Terry drove us 99 yards in the toughest circumstances that anybody can imagine. Tony Davis had a big part in the drive and kind of got us back in the game, and then a couple of field goals, and we win 13-10. So for me to come down south and play an SEC team and have a big play like that was pretty special.
Was Coach Kennard in the stands that night? Did you send him tickets?
It was kind of interesting. After the game, we had of course it was a small locker room. It was it was pretty wild in there, but back then the reporters were actually in the locker room, and they certainly, I had my share of guys from down south to interview me, and just about the whole going to Nebraska and making that big play, and I guess in the excitement of everything at the end of the interview, I just said, hey, by the way, tell Coach Billy Kennard, I said Happy New Year. It was New Year's Eve, and the next day, that was just all kind of headlines in the sports section down south was that I had wished Billy Kennard a Happy New Year. So it was kind of sweet revenge, I guess, but it was a fun night.
Funny thing happened for you guys in those last two bowl games that you played in, the 74 Sugar Bowl and then the Fiesta Bowl in 75. Our starting quarterback were not with us that day. They had some of their worst actual play of their careers. You talked about Dave Humm. Dave Humm was one of the most accurate passers Nebraska's ever had. He was having a horrible night in the Sugar Bowl. And Vince Ferragamo, what happened to him? I think he played one series in the Fiesta Bowl game against Arizona State. He was out, and Terry Luck came to the rescue again.
Yeah, I mean, those are two of the best quarterbacks to ever play at Nebraska, and David Humm and Vince both had long NFL careers, and it happens, and so fortunately, we had Terry who had started games before our senior year, and he was a captain, so you knew everybody was very confident in Terry, and we everybody was a big fan of Terry just because he was a team leader. Even though he was backing up those two guys at the time, he was still a team leader and very involved in really everything that the offense did. And so, yeah, David had a bad game there, and Vince. But once again, I've always said David Humm was one of the most accurate quarterbacks that I've ever seen, period. And that includes all my years coaching. And then Vince was like that too. And certainly he led the Rams to the Super Bowl. And I actually played against him in Canada once when he was up there. So, fortunately the Sugar Bowl, we were able to come back and win, and we fell a little short in the Fiesta Bowl, but both of them for me was it's fun to think back at those games.
Terry Luck, and I was a younger guy at the time, Jimmy, but from what I gather visiting with his teammates and from what I gather visiting with coaches, Terry Luck could have been a great quarterback if he hadn't had so many knee injuries. that he was highly recruited coming out of North Carolina. I think he actually got a cup of coffee in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns, which was unheard of for a backup quarterback to get that much of an opportunity. But if it hadn't been for so many knee injuries, Luck could have been a Heisman Trophy candidate at Nebraska. Do you believe that too?
There's no doubt. I mean, when I got there, I think the knee injuries had already started, but my understanding was Terry was a great runner, a great open field runner, very physical. He had size. He had a cannon for an arm. He could throw it into the upper deck at the Nebraska Stadium there. Was a great personality and leader. He had been a really good basketball player. And so I don't think there's any doubt. He could punt. He could have been a punter for us also. And so back then, knee injuries didn't you weren't able to come back from them quite like you are today. And like you said, Terry played with the Browns. I know at least one season he started several games. And you're right. If he'd have had a healthy knee, he would have gone down as one of the best ever at Nebraska and possibly in the whole college football.
Visiting with Jimmy Burrow, you talked about Jamie in Coach Osborne's last recruiting class. And I know a lot of Nebraska fans are very, very unhappy that this sort of ended with Jimmy Burrow. Jamie was a good football player in high school and had some interest. But Jimmy, talk about how Coach Osborne walked into the recruiting room and said, he's no longer borderline. He's Nebraska material. And this is after a 60-3 run when they could get about anybody they wanted. But talk about what that meant for your family when Coach Osborne said, he's not just a player, he's family.
Well, eventually, I was there working with George Darlington and Craig Bowl under Coach Solich. And Craig Bowl told me the story about they had gone back and forth for like you normally do with a guy that's borderline of whether you're going to offer him a scholarship or not. Jamie was the player of the year in Iowa, and I'm sure they had to put him up against all the best linebackers across the country. So they were going back and forth. And then after several weeks, they were having a recruiting meeting, and Coach Osborne walked in, and before any discussion about anybody, he just said, we're offering Jamie Burrow a scholarship. He's a great player. His dad was a heck of a player for us. It's a great family, and I want him to play for Nebraska. So when we got that call from Dan Young and Coach Osborne, it was certainly as a parent, that was one of the more special days in my life to know that Jamie was going to play for Coach Osborne at Nebraska. So once again, just says a lot about Coach Osborne and his how he cared for his players and what he thought of them. And that's certainly a big part of how come so many former players really love Coach Osborne. And I think you'd be surprised how many of his former players ended up being coaches. And I think a lot of that is because they just were so involved with how he did things and how well he treated players. But you kind of wanted you actually wanted to be like him, which was going to be hard to do. But that was a great day. And we're fortunate that Jamie, got that call and played the 1 year for Coach Osborne and then Coach Solich. And then certainly Dan followed in his footsteps.
Which brings us to Joe Burrow. It's worked out for him. Things worked out for him. But I know that it was very, very painful for the Burrows because Joe really wanted to play at Nebraska. I mean, was this not his goal from the time he knew the difference?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we haven't really dwelled on that and talked a whole lot about this in public, but yeah, I mean, he had the Nebraska gear growing up. Once we were at Nebraska, eventually he learned to ride a bicycle on the turf at Memorial Stadium. So we kind of in our family just always assumed if he was good enough to play at college, that's where he would go. But as you said, it didn't work out. A couple different times it might happen, but it didn't. And I'm a coach, so I have to respect certain decisions that you make as a coach for what's best as your team. And but our family, we did. We wanted him to go play quarterback at Nebraska, and he could run well enough to run the option if anybody wanted him to do that. And but as you said, it all turned out pretty good for him.
Yeah, it turned out. But when I just recall watching him accept the Heisman Trophy, Jimmy, and this is not meant to share with you just because you're sitting here. I've seen a lot of acceptance speeches in sports over the last 40 years. You have too. I've seen a lot of people stand up and say nice things. I've seen a lot of people stand up and say stupid things, but I've never seen a speech like that. Talk about it. It compelled the nation. I mean, it touched the nation, what he said and how he, with the sincerity in his voice. And he saw nothing but blessings. And when he was able to articulate what this meant to him because of all of the people that had been around him all those years, it was really, truly moving. Talk about that night. Did you know what he was going to say? Did he test drive any of that with you and his mother?
Well, there's so many things going on those few days at the Heisman. I mean, it's a whirlwind of events going from really the time you get there. And I think it was about 2 or 3 hours maybe before the ceremony. And I told his mom, Robin, I said, hey, I'm going to go down and ask him if he hasn't even thought about it, if he had anything prepared. So I walked down to his room and he was sitting at the desk and just had a small piece of paper and was, I said, are you good with, what you're going to say? And he said, yeah, I'm just jotting down a few things here on this piece of paper. And so I had no idea what he was going to say. And so, as parents, you're always worried about how he's going to handle himself in that situation. And but I think he got out his small little piece of paper and maybe went off of it for a few minutes. And then I saw him just put it away, and he really, just spoke from the heart. And he was thankful to a lot of people that played a role in his development and to get him to that point. And again, as parents, you're certainly proud of him on the football field, but even more proud that he's able to stand up and articulate, what other people mean to him and his success.
I mean, we're watching it from my house in Valley, Nebraska, and I'm reduced to tears. What were you feeling? What were you and Robin feeling when you saw all this?
Well, we were overwhelmed with emotion. I think we pretty much kept it in check, but inside it was, we were about ready to explode. And because you're watching your son accept the Heisman, and then you're looking behind him, and there's Johnny Rodgers and Eric Crouch, both of which I was on that team when they won the Heisman as a coach and as a player, so I know how much it meant to them. And then you see Paul Hornung and just Archie Griffin and just all the greats that we all grew up at some point really idolizing and respecting. And you're looking, and your son is now a member of that elite group, and just meant a lot to us. It meant a lot to us that Joe had put in the hard work, and certainly had roadblocks, had setbacks, and had overcome those, and was at the top of the college football world that particular night.
I think what really reached Nebraskans that night, Jimmy, was that guy should be our guy. Okay, that's the kind of guy we want in this program. That's the kind of Husker hero that we all grew up with. And I think there was obviously a lot of happiness for him and for you and the family, but there was also a lot of envy because a lot of Nebraskans wish that he had been our guy standing up there. And even if he hadn't won the Heisman Trophy, they wanted that kind of guy in this program. And I'm sure a lot of other people felt the same way. So when he gets drafted by the Bengals, he gets to go play for one of the other Nebraska quarterbacks who is an outstanding individual, not just a really good football player and a really good coach, but a really great guy in Zach Taylor. And I see these two as parallel personalities. What's your impression of the relationship between Joe and Zach?
Well, we had talked. I had met him when he was at the University of Cincinnati because we spent time with those guys at camps in the summer, and Luke Fickle. Well, I guess he wasn't there at the time, but some of those assistants on defense, we had spent time talking football. Same thing with the offense. So I knew Zach from there, and it's kind of the Nebraska family. You people without maybe having even met him, but I had met him. We had some conversations before the Senior Bowl about Joe going there, but before the draft, and he's a sincere individual. He always has been honest with us. I know Joe has commented even in the last couple of days about his relationship with Zach and how they have a great relationship, and they really hit it off from the first time they actually talked in person, which was at the Combine. So Joe's confident in Zach Taylor and what he's getting done there and what they will get done in the future. And as a family, we couldn't be happier that he's playing for Zach because we still love Nebraska, we still care about it, and to have Joe playing for somebody that did have background, for the Huskers is special to us.
Yeah, I got to know Zach very well, and he and Joe are exactly the same guy, except Joe has a little bit more talent, a little bit bigger. Other than that, they're the same guy. A little bit stronger arm, a little bit quicker feet, but otherwise they are the same guy.
Well, they're both hardworking. They're both competitive. I think they do share a lot of the same offensive beliefs in concepts in the passing game and how to move the offense forward in the direction that they need to go to be successful in the NFL. So it's been a good pairing of those two, and we're excited for that future to really get going again next year.
Jimmy, great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time here today. And Dave Humm was the very first recipient of a grant from the Nebraska Greats Foundation. So it's perfectly appropriate and wonderful. The former teammate of his has joined us on the podcast, but we wish you very well. And we'd love to see all the Burrows back in Nebraska, at least for a visit sometime soon.
Oh, we're coming back. And, my wife's from Nebraska. All of her family still lives back there, and Jamie's back there. And Bill Moose is a good friend of mine, the athletic director. So we're excited that Nebraska football is going to get back to what it once was, and we're going to be at some games in the near future.
Can't wait to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Jimmy Burrow, former Nebraska standout safety, and, of course, the father of the following generation of Burrows, from Jamie Burrow to Dan Burrow and Joe Burrow, here on the Nebraska Greats podcast. And if you want to be a part of it, please feel free to log on to www.nygreats.org. All gifts are welcome and are deductible, and we'd love to have you as a part of it. Thank you very much to Jimmy Burrow, and thanks to all of you for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.
This has been Nebraska Greats, a weekly podcast serving the Nebraska Greats Foundation. You can find each episode on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Play, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Please give generously to serve Nebraska's former sports heroes in need at negreats.org. And be sure to follow the Any Greats on Facebook and Twitter.